Advent Rising is not a game many people would be proud to say sits on their game shelf. A rough, buggy piece of software, released under time constraints despite its 4-year-long development, Advent was intended to be the first part in a trilogy of heavily story-driven sci-fi action-adventure games, bursting with godlike psychic powers, acrobatic moves, and a huge variety in gameplay options. During this first entry into the series, the player would make decisions at key plot points that would affect all future Advent games to come later, leading to gigantic branching paths through the story and nearly limitless replay value. Unfortunately as it is, Advent Rising is a pale shadow of its ambitions. Though Advent Rising ended up as a video game, its creators Donald and Jeremy Mustard originally envisioned the franchise as a comic book and started working on the concept in 1992. After they worked up the corporate ladder, they eventually landed a job at Glyphix, a small company that did business with several big names in the games industry, making artwork, cinematic and promotional videos, and box covers for games like Unreal. Soon after, the Glyphix Games division was formed, and Advent Rising transformed into a video game. Not long after this, the brothers, through eBay, came across a CD of unlisted celebrity addresses and phone numbers. They won the bid with a measly $40, and once it arrived they found Orson Scott Card, writer of books like Ender's Game and the Homecoming Saga, listed. Being huge fans of Card, they desperately wanted him on the team to write the screenplay for their game, and managed to convince Glyphix to arrange a 30-minute meeting between them. Card signed on to the project 3 hours later. From this, Glyphix finally managed to get support for the game from a publisher, Majesco Entertainment, who announced the game in the middle of 2003. This announcement also revealed that Tommy Tallarico, best known for Earthworm Jim and Video Games Live, would be composing and orchestrating the music, adding another well-known talent to the game's development team. But it wasn't until summer 2004 that the press got to see the game in motion and play it at E3. Unfortunately, this was only the start of worries for the Advent staff. The demo at E3 was panned by players for running at a hideous frame rate, its controls were still horribly unpolished, and the game didn't look as promised in promotional screenshots. 2 months after the bad reception, Majesco quietly announced the game was being delayed until summer 2005, while almost simultaneously announcing they were publishing another game featuring psychic powers, this time from developer Double Fine Studios, Psychonauts. Psychonauts was set to release a month ahead of Advent Rising in April 2005, leading to what Majesco hoped to be a very profitable year. But when April finally came, things didn't go so well. Though universally praised by critics and given award after award, Psychonauts was a commercial failure. Some blamed it on Majesco's marketing strategy, saying it was weak and ineffective. Majesco was not about to let that happen to their next game, though, and promotions and advertisements for Advent Rising began in full force. There were comic books, TV spots, print ads, and pre-sale deals at GameStop and Electronics Boutique. The first 500,000 boxes contained a free 2-month subscription to Xbox Live. A spin-off game for the PSP was announced titled Advent Shadow, bringing the total up to 4 Advent games. Movie adaptations were pitched to Hollywood. Orson Scott Card was set to write several novel tie-ins, and Majesco even bought an ad to play before the opening of Star Wars Episode 3 in hundreds of thousands of theaters. The biggest promotion of all, though, was right on the box. 3 weeks before Advent Rising's release, Majesco offered a $1 million Race to Save Humanity contest, in which players connected to Xbox Live could download a colored Advent Rising logo into their game, hidden somewhere inside each chapter by the developers. The logo would change positions every week for the 6-week contest, and give players a code that could be entered on the Advent Rising website for a chance to win the grand prize. On top of that, the developers planned to release extra levels and additional cutscenes through Xbox Live. With all the hype surrounding it, Advent finally released for the Xbox on May 31st, but the critics were not impressed, and the reviews came down hard. Features promised hundreds of times in interviews had been stripped from the final game for instability. A dozen vehicles were removed, including several that had been talked about since the start of development, reducing the number of playable vehicles from a supposed 18 down to 5. The unique flick targeting system was also disappointing, frustrating, and littered with bugs. And despite being fairly unimpressive graphically, the frame rate would frequently stagger and jerk, taking the audio along with it, even in areas with little to no action. Worst of all, it still had several game-crashing bugs in its code that had made it past testing. The game had not been finished, and the critics made sure that their readership knew. Advent Rising had bombed at retail and ended up a bigger commercial failure than Psychonauts. Majesco's financial situation spiraled to the point of near bankruptcy, almost costing them their stock market listing. In keeping with Advent, the Race to Save Humanity contest was riddled with bugs and security issues, which, coupled with their crushing financial losses, left Majesco no choice but to outright cancel the promotion entirely. None of Card's novel tie-ins ever came to fruition. The downloadable content was completely abandoned. And finally, Majesco contacted the Mustard Brothers and informed them that they were going to be canceling development of all further Advent games, including the PSP side story, Advent Shadow. And Majesco was going to keep the rights to the Advent name. Three months later, Glyphix released the PC version. Along with welcome improvements to the game's frame rate, the infamous game-crashing bugs that had infuriated players on the Xbox had been fixed. Almost all of the more serious complaints against Advent were completely reversed at the PC release, to the point where it was practically a whole new product. And with most of the glitches gone, players could experience it as intended. An all-around solid game with surprising depth and an interesting, if unfinished, story. While there was no additional content in the port, it was a vastly more stable game and received notably higher scores and reviews across the board. But the damage was done. Advent Rising was deemed a victim of hype and high expectations, and to this day it lives in Psychonauts' shadow. I hope you'll join me to see the first and last game of the Advent trilogy.